loss of situational awareness, and spatial disorientation. Spatial disorientation, this occurs when the pilot is unable to correctly interpret the aircraft's attitude in flight. This can commonly occur when the pilot is dealing with a bunch of different tasks. That's known as task saturation. This can be like changing radio frequencies, dealing with passengers, reading checklists, something that keeps their attention away from interpreting the instruments. When they're dealing with other things going on in the cockpit, they might begin to rely more on their instincts, such as their vestibular system, or some other like systems in their inner ear, which interpret attitude in a different way than the aircraft instruments. This can begin to give them a false sense of attitude, and they can begin making pitch or bank adjustments according to their own inner ear, and that'll get them into a bank or pitch attitude that is different from what their desired outcome is. This can then of course lead into some other things that I'll catch on later, such as graveyard spiral. Some of the vestibular illusions that are common in aviation is the somatogravic illusion. One of the common examples for that is going to be when you're taking off. The feeling of that acceleration of the aircraft moving faster can trick your mind into thinking that you're pitching up. This can cause pilots to then try to correct that feeling of pitching up by then pushing the nose forward, which can then cause them to enter a dive, and that's definitely not what they want to do, especially during something such as takeoff. The graveyard spiral, this can occur when the pilot takes the airplane out of a bank and puts the airplane into a level sense of flight. Their inner ear is going to trick them to make them believe that the airplane is still turning in a certain direction, and that can cause them to then try to overcorrect, and they might be turning the airplane into a different direction, or they might be making the turn steeper. One of those different things, but overall it's going to enter the airplane into a spiral, and that can be very hard to get out of, especially when you're dealing with spatial disorientation. The Coriolis illusion, if there is a sudden head movement, such as you're looking down reading your checklist and then you look up briefly, those sudden head motions can trick your mind to thinking that you're turning or pitching in a different direction, and that can cause you to want to try to overcorrect and try to fix those feelings, but then in reality you're actually entering into a turn or a pitch, some sort of an attitude that you're not wanting. Some of the visual illusions, which can also occur when we're flying, sometimes we'll deal with a false horizon. This is common at night. There might be a road with a bunch of lights on it, but the road is at such an angle where the way we interpret it, it looks like the horizon might be at a certain slant, when in reality you could be flying straight and level. But looking at the different lights, you might be thinking that you're flying at a bank, and then you might try to correct the so-called bank that the airplane's in, and in reality you're going to enter a turn that you don't want to be in. Some other common ones is runway slope illusion. If you're going into if you're flying at night and you're going to be landing at a runway that's sloped at a certain angle, this might make the airplane appear either higher or lower than anticipated, and the pilot may begin to then correct, either flying higher or lower of the approach and be on an altitude that's higher or lower than the proper glide slope. Featureless terrain is another really common one. If you're flying over ocean at night, for example, this can really trick your mind to wonder where the horizon is, because you don't really have the ground lighting systems, or you don't have you're not flying over a city, for example, where you can easily see that you're flying over a city, you can see the ground with all the lights. But if you're flying over a desert with no lights, or a bunch of mountain terrain, and you don't have any lights to go off of, it can be very hard to tell where the horizon is and where the ground is. And if you're looking out in the distance, it's very hard to tell where the sky is and where the ground is, and that can really lead to some spatial disorientation. Some of the ways to avoid these illusions: try to fly under the hood, definitely with an instructor, but try to do that often, just so you can really get an idea of how your body responds to different things, like, you know, unusual attitudes, and just learning how to recover. Really get that down of when you feel uncomfortable, when you feel, you know, you're turning in a certain way, just get back to looking at the instruments and do not rely on your inner instincts, because your instincts, they're not meant to fly. You know, you're humans were not really made to be up in airplanes. They're meant to be on the ground, and your body experiences G force and load factor much differently when you're flying than when you're walking on the ground. So you can't trust that. You have to go off of the airplane instruments, and having a better understanding of how the inner ear works is great for understanding how to get out of spatial disorientation. And when you learn how to, you know, how easily the body can start feeling different motions, and how it can start tricking you into thinking that you're in a steep bank or something like that, or when you're flying, or, you know, you might actually be in a very steep bank, but if you're in a coordinated turn, your body's going to think you're flying upright, and it can be very confusing sometimes. So learning how all that works can really help you avoid those kind of situations.